All right, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Vilka. I'm with All Aboard Northwest, a regional advocacy organization focused on building better passenger rail and transit opportunities throughout the greater Northwest region. And joining with us today is our Vice President, Charlie Hamilton.
And I'm Charlie Hamilton from Seattle, and I'm also involved with All Aboard Northwest and a number of other rail advocacy organizations. And we're on our train track. We are here to talk to you and to many other communities around the region to talk about what it would take to bring back passenger rail service to this region after many, many years. And let's talk first about what we think the future should look like. We think that what we want is seamless mobility, and that would build what's called world-class transportation. If you are familiar with systems in other countries, you've got trains, you've got buses, you've got bikes, you've got all of the above, and it's really here what we need as well. So the reason that that's particularly important is because 30% of Americans don't drive. Either they're too old, they're too young, they're too poor, they're disabled, they are concerned about the future of the planet, or they're just in places where the weather makes it difficult. And here's some samples of what it would take to get from point A to point B. These are numbers out of Google. If you are driving, those numbers aren't too bad. But if you're not driving, it's probably going to be today. It might even be tomorrow or the next day before you get there, if you can get there at all.
And indeed, for some of the communities served by the existing skeletal national network, that the passenger train might be the last name in town for non-personal automobile transportation. So if the train wasn't there, then people there trying to travel there might not have any other option except for maybe a very expensive taxi bill, if indeed you could actually get one to get there at all.
So we think that there are benefits to communities, significant benefits to communities, and we call them the 3 E's. There are benefits to the economics of the community, and we'll give you some numbers in a minute. There are benefits to the environment, and there are benefits to equity. So let's start by talking about the economy. These are just a few of the numbers that are out there, but you're probably aware that if somebody comes to visit your town, they're going to bring money with them. And these numbers are from the state of Washington, but we're told that they're pretty similar in other states as well. If people come for the day, it's $84 a day. If they're overnight, it's $366. And by the way, we will have this presentation on our website, so everybody's welcome to take a look at it. But let's talk about being really reasonable with your taxpayer dollars. If you are concerned about being able to get from place to place, look at what Virginia did. They did something interesting. They recently decided that there was a lot of congestion between Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia. And they calculated that it was going to take something like $12.5 billion to build one more lane between those two towns. And they were like, that's not we're not being good stewards of taxpayer dollars if we do that. So they said, well, what else could we do instead? And they said, let's calculate what it would take to build a statewide rail passenger and freight network. And they came out with a number of $3.7 billion, which is a third of the cost.
And this precedent is actually starting to be used or looked at with their counterparts over in Colorado with the Colorado Front Range Passenger Rail System, that currently the state of Colorado is finishing up what they call the GAP project between Denver and Fort Collins and Denver and Colorado Springs, going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes in either direction, But once those projects are completed, the state will be out of right-of-way on the highway, and that provides an impetus to really look at the cost comparisons for them trying to expand the highway yet again, or looking in conjunction with the host railroads there for putting in passenger rail service along with improved freight service and capabilities along the front range.
So let's look at some of the statistics about existing passenger rail services. One that's particularly of interest to us is the Empire Builder, which is the train that goes between Chicago, Portland, and Seattle. And you'll notice that it has some really good numbers. But the one that I think people forget is that it doesn't just serve those endpoints. It also serves all of the 46 communities in between that it also serves. So it means that if you want to go from Cutbank, Montana to Fargo, North Dakota, you can do that, and that may be the only way you can do that.
But because the train runs the full length of the route there from Chicago to Seattle and Portland, that it provides that opportunity for the overlapping city pairs, rather than trying to cut up the route into very smaller segments and then creating a very awkward transition point for people. That can be a disincentive for people to want to use that service. Supplemental services on top of the base backbone long distance service might be looked at in the future, but not in replacement to it.
And here's some more statistics about the Empire Builder. One thing that's interesting is these numbers are very positive. They have really good ridership, even though in North Dakota, which is the state that was looking at this, most of the folks who are arriving in North Dakota get there in the middle of the night.
For example, Fargo-Moorhead is served at 3:30 a.m. service, which is not exactly maybe an ideal time for people to want to be traveling, unless they're a night owl, in which case good for you. But for a lot of people there, it might be an arduous sort of check for them or consideration, but people can and do very robustly use the service there, and then it gets through later in the night, and about mine I believe is 8 a.m. service, so that the state of North Dakota already in 2019 dollars gets almost $29 million of economic benefits by the Empire Builder, even if the service times were not exactly ideal. Imagine how much that could be improved if they had like twice daily service, so roughly 12-hour offset. So you had daylight service along the route and really being able to provide an attractive option for people to travel.
And we were talking earlier about creating a hub around your train station. And here's an example of what can happen when you build something like that. The folks in Meridian, Mississippi, about 20 years ago, put $7 million into an Amtrak station. It's also used for buses and other things. And they figure in the last 20 years, they have generated $200 million in revenue back from the money that's been put into that train station. We can also talk about the environment. I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that environmentally, if you're trying to move goods and people, it's much more environmentally friendly to do that with trains rather than trucks. And so we won't go into it in a great detail, but there are lots of statistics about that. Then let's talk about equity. Equity gets used in a lot of different ways, but right now the federal government is saying when they mean equity, they mean geographic equity, particularly for locations that are less served by transportation, that are low income, that are tribal, that have disability people, and that are rural. So those are, that's at the top of their priority list right now.
And that leads us to this map that was put out by Amtrak last spring here, what they call the Amtrak Connects Us map, or we call it the Amtrak Doesn't Connect Us map. Since I don't know if you realize it, but people actually live out here too. So we're saying it's high time we get back on the map and showcase what we can do for our communities.
We just found out the other day that one of our friends in Boise actually presented this to the Amtrak people. We don't know how they responded, but we got a big kick out of it, I'll tell you.
And that leads us to really is a vision and idea, one iteration here of what a full regional Greater Northwest passenger rail network can or really should start looking like. Really building up the connections and services to really facilitate and allow people to travel where they need to go and when they need to go, and really kind of conceptualizing where are the travel corridors that people really think about when they're trying to think about travel, and how do you really be able to facilitate it. And as you see on the map here, the yellow lines are the existing skeletal Amtrak routes, such as the Empire Builder and the California Zephyr. And the blue lines are new connections we're envisioning for passenger rail service.
And when we say new connections, we're not talking about building new tracks. These blue lines are all existing tracks. They might require some upgrades, they might require some safety improvements, but they're all there. And so while there are lots of other ones that you could build, we're focusing on the tracks that are already in existence. Now, we know that they're owned by private railroads, the Union Pacific, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and others, but we believe that we can create a situation where it will be a benefit to the, let's say, the UP, and also to the users. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So our vision is more than just maps. Excuse me. It's not just lines on a map. It's also, as we said earlier, it's also about seamless mobility. It's about being able to go out of your home, having sidewalks, having bikes, having local transit, having trains, having air service, whatever it needs for you to get to point A, from point A to point B. That's really what we're talking about.
Really building up a full seamless network, as rail is not the be-all end-all, but as one part of an interconnected, interdependent transportation network. I mean, I love my truck, I'm not giving it up. I don't like to be solely dependent on it for traveling from one city to another city or traveling back home to visit family. That's a lot of windshield time, and that can be a lot of dicey roads in the winter.
So 2022 is just an amazing opportunity. There is $66 billion in federal funds that is available for rail that has never been available before. And so what we're saying is, and we'll mention it in a minute, the federal government is saying, this is the time. You need to be applying for these, and we'll talk about it in more detail. But again, this is what's happening. This is the circumstance. And we've got some success stories. Our friends in Vermont, I used to live very near here, and they put together with state money and federal money and local match money a train that hadn't been seen on those tracks since 1953. So 69 years later, they were bringing back service between Burlington, which is Vermont's largest city, and Rutland, which is sort of the gateway to their ski areas. And this only started up a couple of weeks ago. And I have to tell you, they are so excited about having a train that goes to places like Middlebury. Middlebury is the home of Middlebury College, which is, I believe, the most expensive college in the country. And so they've now got ways to get people there that they didn't 2 weeks ago. So that's really exciting.
If they did it, we can do it too.
And so Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg was in Coeur d'Alene a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking to the Western Governors Association. And he said, you know, you've really got to apply for these because this is your opportunity. And so we heard him, and so we're volunteers. We don't, we're not representing the federal government, but we believe that we as a region need to take advantage of the money that's available. And so we'll talk in more detail.
And one of the opportunities we have acutely before us is why what we were working on last year is what's known as Section 222.14 of the IIJA, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, is a bill or a section there to study former Amtrak long distance routes, including both the Pioneer route, which is in green, and the North Coast Hiawatha route. And this passed last November in the IIJA, and the FRA has confirmed to us that both routes will be included in the round of studies.
And the Pioneer, the green line that you see on the screen, that did in fact serve this part of Wyoming, and we think there's no reason why it shouldn't again. There are many other routes that they might also be studying, but these are a couple that we think are particularly of interest to this corner of the world.
And we hope to learn more from the FRA next week during the Greater Northwest Passenger Rail Summit up in Billings, Montana, how the FRA is going to roll out these studies and what their approach might be.
So this is a bit of a footnote. For people who might not be familiar, there are a number of ways that trains are paid for. What they call the national network is paid for through funding that goes through Amtrak. It is trains that are more than 750 miles in length. Less than 750, then it's required by law for the states that it serves to pay for them. So, for example, in the Northwest, you have the Amtrak Cascades that goes between Eugene, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, BC. That's paid for by the states of Oregon and Washington. In California, you also have state-supported trains, and in other parts of the country, you do too. You also have what are called regional trains, sometimes called commuter trains. So we were just in Salt Lake City yesterday, and they have commuter trains called the Front Runner that go
Provo up to Ogden.
Thank you. I never remember which order is which. So those are all part and parcel of how trains are paid for.
And that they don't have to be mutually exclusive at all. And that indeed, like where some of the other trains, such as state-supported trains and commuter trains, that they operate on a lot of the same infrastructure as quote-unquote long-distance trains. And that's what we see is really building up a full seamless transportation network and really being reinforcing to allow people to travel when they need to go and where they need to go for multiple distances. And
you'll notice also that stations are owned by a number of different organizations. I understand that the depot here is owned by the city. Is that right? Yeah.
The depot, the actual land is UP.
Okay, all right. But that gives you an opportunity when it comes time to be thinking about, local match and so on. It doesn't have to be in dollars. It can be the use of that facility. And locally owned depots like that, and there are lots of them, are really good opportunities for local communities to put in their part of the process of putting these together. But we'll also remind people that I'm sure UP owns the tracks, and that is true of almost everywhere in the United States, with very few exceptions. And so we need to make sure that what we do is going to be of benefit both to us as passengers and also to UP. And we think that can be done.
Absolutely. And with the opportunities of the IIJA, we can actually make a compelling case for that. Since, as I say, singularly the needs of freight rail and freight transportation necessitate a reinvestment in our national rail system. Also, the needs of passenger rail and passenger mobility necessitate a reinvestment in our national rail system. So together they really combine and really reinforce the cost to do the projects and do the various constituent projects well, not just sort of budget bill with Band-Aid fixes for the time being. Let's go through, look at them coherently, and find win-win solutions for all parties.
And so in order for communities to be successful in participating in this bonanza of money that's out there, it's not just the folks who are interested in rail need to participate, but it also needs to be your chambers of commerce. It needs to be economic development organizations. It needs to be other sorts of organizations that are interested in the 3 E's that we talked about. One of the ones that's on here is a physicians organization, because they're concerned that a lot of people don't have access to medical care. And so that's why they're participating in this discussion that we're having. So the next steps are pretty simple. First step is, it's only a few days away, but there will be a really great opportunity in Billings next week to learn more about what's happening. And it is going to be available remotely. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome to join us. Dan and I will be there, as many of the other folks that we've talked to in the last few days will be there. We have elected officials. We have folks from the Federal Railroad Administration. We have any number of different kinds, and from the railroads. They'll all be there.
Ultimately trying to get all the key stakeholders there to really look at things at the regional level and see what are the opportunities and how can we leverage them intelligently moving forward.
And then the next step is, we'll skip that one. There we go. Well, went too far, but that's okay. The next thing that you want to do is you want to have local meetings. You want to be talking to the folks in the community about, is this something that people are interested in? And we've done any number of those in the last 2 years. We're more than happy to help people plan how you would do something like that. But what we find is that when you get people together, they really are interested. Actually, we've been doing it for several years now. Back in 2019, our friends at AORTA, which is the Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates Group, they put together a meeting in La Grande, and they had 150 people show up. The folks in All Aboard Washington, which is Washington State, they did a meeting in Blaine, Washington, right up there at the border, and they got 75 people. So there's just a lot of interest in this. Then the next issue, of course, is making some noise, getting some publicity. We're very grateful that you're participating, the press is participating, that it'll be up on social media. That's great. We're really happy about that. And there can be more. But really what we're talking about is convincing the decision makers that there's more to your community than cars. And these are some of the communities and how beautiful they are. And a lot of people don't recognize how much wonderful stuff is in their area, because they're too busy in the big cities or in their state capitals focusing on that rather than what your communities could look like. And I have to say, when I drove down today, when you look at what is happening at the depot and even the movie theater with that fancy marquee, I'm like, wow, is that fancy or what? I mean, people really they've got concern for their community and they want to make it successful. And that's what we're talking about.
And the next step is convincing decision makers, and especially like with letters and resolutions of support are a key instrumental tool that are important and very valuable for convincing your decision makers, not only at the state level, but at the congressional level and at the national level and stuff. And a heartfelt thank you to the city of Rock Springs for the resolution last year, really started helping get on the map there with decision makers. Since if our communities don't step up and just offer up an inclination or visible support or interest in these things, then it's going to be so easy for certain actors, maybe at the national level, just sort of pass us over and say we're just flyover country. It's like, no, we have very vibrant communities. We have honest interest in this, and we can do quite a lot, quite responsibly, with the limited resources we have before us.
So we said earlier that there's money involved that is available on the national level. And one of the first things that's going to be available is what they call the Corridor Identification Program. And what that is what it sounds like, is which corridors does the federal government want to put money into? And they're going to identify the ones that they think are the most financially feasible, and so on. But what they're asking for, and the Secretary of Transportation told us this, he said, if you want to participate in this corridor identification program, you have to send letters of interest, what they call expressions of interest. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a letter. That's all you have to write. But it's like, we're interested in this. We want to be considered for part of this particular project. Go ahead.
And the opportunities we have with that, and why we're advocating for the full extent of the Pioneer route, is that all long distance trains, quote unquote, are themselves a series of corridors, like we said, overlapping city pairs, but not all quote unquote corridors meet that 750 mile requirement there to qualify as long distance. So if we can build up the backbone, then other areas might have interest in the future to do supplemental and additional service on top of it. For example, just recently last year, Wisconsin and Minnesota got together to duplicate service between the Twin Cities and Chicago. They're so going from once daily to twice daily service in that corridor on top of the Empire Builder service.
And let's talk about multiple state systems, okay? One of the things that the feds have told us is that if you are working together with other states, you will get a higher score, if you will, on some of these grants. So what they are suggesting is that there be created interstate compacts, which is basically, your state and your neighbors get together and say, we want to work together on this. So, for example, yesterday we were talking in Utah, and they want to work with Idaho to have basically a compact that would serve the I-15 corridor. And then the folks on the other side of Idaho want to connect with Oregon and Washington in a compact over there. And there's no reason why you can't have more than one. So
and with the opportunities of the IIJA, with a provision that passed last fall, that the first 10 compacts that are formed qualify for federal matching funds there. So by being an early adopter and getting your name out there and working with our neighbors, that we're able to do a lot and really leverage a lot for our region. Again, that's why we started All Aboard Northwest, is that people in commerce readily travel over state boundaries, but there hasn't always been a very good facilitating mechanism for planning and really doing envisioning and enacting projects on that level. But this is a mechanism we have today where we didn't have it even a couple years ago, to be able to work together over state lines to see these substantial but important projects move forward.
And other things that you can be thinking about is there will be needed the sorts of cost-benefit analyses, economic analysis, that when you decide that you're interested in a particular project, that has to be calculated and to see whether it makes financial sense. There's even money to create those kinds of analyses, so you don't have to put them up yourself. But those are going to be necessary.
And key among what we're talking about with the benefit cost analysis, a key consideration that's on the Federal Railroad Administration sort of radar right now is moving beyond the simple fare box recovery that had been used as metrics for many decades in the past about the quote-unquote viability of passenger rail services. It's talking about providing service to people and regions there, regional equity, and really facilitating people where they need to go and what are the economic opportunities, how does it come home, how does it really impact communities and people, services, and so forth.
And the next thing to think about is talk to the railroad and the folks who are stakeholders in this and say what improvements to the infrastructure are necessary to not only to build passenger rail, but also to build better freight rail. Back in 2008, I happened to live in Washington State. That state got almost $1 billion in federal funds, and almost all of that went into infrastructure for BNSF, which is the big railroad in that part of the world. And so those are the things that when you work with your local railroad, you have to say, well, what are they interested in? And what could benefit both them and those of us who would like to see passenger rail return?
And there are certain maybe low-hanging fruit projects that no matter whichever way you slice it on and dice it in, as you do envision for passenger rail studies, that no matter what they are, realize that maybe this project component, whether it be maybe a bridge replacement, that ultimately we need to do it no matter what, if there's passenger service or not, or there's increased freight service or not. So why don't we just sort of collaborate on that and take care of that? And one other key consideration as it relates to just the national rail system at large, that's a good point to look at, is the grade crossing inventory and grade crossing separation program there, that there's money there for separating grade crossings that have become a safety hazard or so forth. And that can be a good point of collaboration with host railroads. And our counterparts in the freight rail advocacy organizations, that's one key consideration they have on their radar moving forward. So we're talking to them as we hear from communities about potential projects.
And we've already talked about, what your community might be able to put up in terms of local match. And again, it can be facilities, it can be advertising, it can be any number of things. So those are some things to be thinking about. Just to sort of end this now, these are some of the places that we've been so far in the last several years, and we're actually behind on this map. But it gives you an idea of the places that we've been, everything from counties to cities to towns, and the green bits are tribal areas. So we're talking to basically everybody. And once again, what All Aboard Washington, I've got too many organizations. All Aboard Northwest we're involved in is, again, trying to create seamless mobility, again, for the rural and the other types of communities that we're talking about. And we're a nonprofit. So anybody who's interested in donating is welcome to do so. And here's us. And we would be delighted to get your feedback, your comments, your questions, and how can we help you, and where do you think your community is going at this point?
I have a question.
Sure. This is our mayor, by the way. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon. We talked about the project, yet we talked about the goal is to utilize existing infrastructure. So what is the project? Is the cost associated to each, say, entity or region associated with improvements on the infrastructure itself? Is that what the project is?
Well, that's the studies that are going to be done will give us those numbers. Okay. Because of the fact that we have those studies coming up, they will come back to us with estimates of what it will cost. We are of the opinion that it will not be something that can't manage to be fit in the $66 billion.
No, definitely. We don't see it as an insurmountable obstacle to overcome. But first things first for us in our region, especially with like the Pioneer route, is really being able to go through, do the studies, be able to understand what the service really can be for the communities, and building up the full national network. And then working in conjunction with that through that process with the host railroads. What are the different considerations as passenger rail services added back to the line that really need to be done to not only foster and improve and work with a successful passenger rail service, but to not negatively impact their freight operations, and ultimately really we should open the viewport to really look at how can we try to build to the future where things are going for both passenger and freight opportunities, so we can hopefully be ahead of the curve rather than trying to scramble and play catch up in the future. But those are the sort of considerations that these studies really should start looking at.
Yeah, and I think that is, I think you put the nail on the head. The UP, especially around here, I don't think they are too excited to allow any other rail service on their line because they're focused on freight. That's where their money comes in, is freight. And then on the revenue side of that, then does a portion of the revenue generated also help assist the UP, if we're talking about Region UP, for the maintenance portion that they're going to need, because you're going to have that discussion as well as wear and tear on the existing main line.
And you know, yes, you're absolutely correct. But take a look at what has been done in California. UP and the state of California Joint Powers Authorities got together and they came up with a way of providing funding to UP and slots for passenger trains to between Sacramento and the Bay Area, and they're running, I think, 7 a day now. And UP is happy because they're getting some funds, and the state is happy because they're providing the train service. A quote that I had a conversation several years ago with a guy who at the time was the vice president at BNSF, and he says, "We'll do anything you like, just give us money."
Yeah.
So really, it really is a matter of how do you create a system that is going to be win-win for everybody, and we recognize that.
Well, and in our region that we live with, the 8 months of winter that we go through, and at the drop of a hat, the interstate system's shut down. We have students that travel to Laramie, to the college, people that want to go to Utah, Salt Lake for maybe shopping, but maybe it's medical reasons because we don't have that certain service that's offered here. So definitely a safer way to travel, more dependable. So it really makes sense. I'm frankly surprised it ever went away, but I'm excited to hopefully see it come back. It's just trying to, there's a lot of moving parts and trying to get to understand whose responsibility, whether it be the state, the county, the city of Rock Springs, is what portion, and how do we get to the end result?
Yes, absolutely, and we're not the people to recommend how that's going to go, but when you talk to your colleagues in all of those levels of government, those are the decisions that you folks are going to want to make. We were in Utah yesterday, and we were talking about the way they do transportation, and they were saying, well, if it's highways, it's the Utah Department of Transportation. If it's not highways, then it is sort of jumbled up in other different organizations, and that's one of the things that they're going to have to overcome in order to make it work in their part of the world.
And it's bizarre because every once in a while, the UP main line is just right here, a block away, and you'll see a passenger train come by, and never stops. And it's bizarre.
It is.
That it just comes right on by, and I mean, we have a depot, we have a need. Why does not that train stop? And I'm sure it's the spacing, and you got freight coming and everything else, everything's timed, but surely if it's coming through there, it should stop at each one of these communities.
Absolutely. I mean, you may be aware that UP is showing off its famous steam train this summer. Mm-hmm. And it's going to, I forget all the places that it's going to.
Yeah, we're one of those stops.
Are you?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, big boy.
Yes. Yes. And they do have a couple of train sets that are passenger train sets. I've seen it. I've never been on it, but
I've stayed on it numerous times. The executive coaches down in Cheyenne, just gorgeous.
Mhm.
Restaurant trains and sleepers, but would it be Amtrak or not necessarily so, that would be the provider?
That's a decision that will be made.
That's,
Okay. Amtrak, I'm sure, will be interested in it, but there are also any number of other organizations that could do this. We have people that we know. Actually, the folks in Billings, there will be Amtrak people there, but there will also be a number of other railroad providers that will also be there.
Yeah, especially on there's a lot of interest. There's a number of private providers like that. I can't remember if it's the San Joaquins or if it's the other one I'm trying to think of in California, but they're operated by, is it Herzog or another operator like that. There's a number of other private operators who have the capability to be able to do such. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. It's not our decision to make, but those are the conversations that ultimately need to be happening. But yeah, when you see a passenger train coming through town currently, I believe that's when they're doing track work on the Rio Grande route there through Colorado, so that they do a temporary reroute, but they don't do any stops. But I mean, seeing it go through there and then being able to keep the schedule on either side says that it hopefully shouldn't be too much of an insurmountable obstacle there to be able to work cooperatively with DP and be able to see regular passenger trains come through here to Rock Springs.
yeah.
That's going to be a challenge.
Well, it will, but again, money helps.
That's what I'm hoping for, especially at the opportunities we have with the BIL, the IIJA this year, that I hope that we and our counterparts with the freight advocacy organizations and the host railroads can actually look at obstacles as opportunities with the resources we have before us that we haven't for decades.
So we really do have a unique opportunity, and we've been making these train. This is our second train track. We did one in Washington State last year, but we have so much more good news this year than we did last year. So we're really excited about that. And the next one is probably going to be a collegiate train track, and we're going to go to college towns because we know there's a lot of interest there. Mm-hmm. So you can tell your friends in Laramie and other places that if they're interested, let us know, because we'd love to come back and talk to them. And now that everybody is used to doing things remotely, we're more than happy to jump in and help local organizations as well.
And exactly as you said, Mayor, that there's a lot of interest throughout the greater region too for people for being able to get students to universities and back, and just parents to get there and back in just inclement weather. And I will say I've heard quite an uptick. While I was just talking with someone on the street in Laramie there, it's like, yeah, if we had a train there, could totally load it up with students there to go to Denver, go to anywhere else in the state, or even over to Salt Lake City, that there's been inquiries that way. So just really being able to foster what that opportunity and dynamic is. As we brought up with the Virginia precedent, that sometimes where there is passenger rail service, that the students have been known to quite inundate them on Friday and Saturdays. They're trying to travel here or there.
Yeah.
And I know some folks at Washington State University in Pullman, and of course the big football game, right, is the Apple Cup, which is Pullman, and then it goes to Seattle the next year and back again. And they've been wanting for years to put a train together that would do that. So, those are the kinds of things that make money for everybody and, get people excited about being on a train. Well, what else can we help you with? What other questions might you have, and what other information can we take off to Billings next week?
I'm just excited to hear more. Like I said, we've been working on this for several years, even as far back as I came into office in 2003, the first term, and it's definitely a need. But like I said, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered and a lot of moving parts to get there.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, 2022 is a unique year, and this is an opportunity that may not come again. So we're encouraging everyone to think about how your community, your state can participate in.
So are you saying that individual communities would apply for grants or?
It depends. There are different grants for different things. Okay. If you're talking about creating a whole train, obviously it's going to be more than a community. But that, as we said earlier, might well be an interstate compact. So
Yeah.
it would be something like that. But if you already have a really terrific train station, but if you needed renovation on a facility, that might well be something that your community or your county or your MPO or whatever might participate in.
Ultimately, I guess the first things first is with the studies they'll be doing, and then just sort of getting the broader awareness to people and your counterparts across the state. They're really helping to elevate the cause to honestly and sincerely look at these things for what they can really mean for us today. They're at the state level, through the state legislature, through the governor, DLT, and up through the congressional level to show, like with the map there, that people actually live out here. We aren't looking for 20 dozen trains a day like some other regions throughout the nation maybe are hoping for, but we can do quite a lot at quite a low price point, therefore maximum effect for our community. So why shouldn't we be considered?
Right. Well, we only have sometimes 2 flights a day, normally 1. So, if the train went through here once or twice a day, you'd cover the need.
Absolutely.
And like that goes to the idea with like seamless mobility, that we're not looking to usurp or take away from any other mode, but how can we work really well and effectively together so people know that they can get a ride, whether it be by airplane, by train from Rock Springs to wherever they need to go, and be able to foster those throughway connections, rather than you're trying to look at multiple different providers and try to figure out, oh, forget it, I'm going to just drive 14 hours because the weather's hopefully going to be good.
Yeah, and the bizarre thing is most, I would say, if not all, the infrastructure is in place because it used to exist with the depot itself. All the sidings, they're still there, which is the expensive part. That's because laying rail. So it's
Well, exactly. And we, like any taxpayer, we're concerned about using our money as best and efficiently as possible. And so that really is why when you do have that existing infrastructure, let's use it.
yeah.
And then finding our unique collaborative opportunities between not only the freight rail interest, but also if there's local economic interest, or maybe a new investor or company maybe wants to move to town, and trying to, how can you be able to divvy up and go off from whatever, maybe a sticker price might come back on stuff, but find multiple different angles and reasons to do these various constituent projects. Like out east in our greater Northwest territory there in the plains and through like Minnesota, with increasing growth in yields for produce and agriculture, that they find that they really need to have good, adequate rail service, if they don't want to have the highways just completely beaten to snot. So that just is another opportunity, another leverage point to really elevate all these constituent projects from a low simmer to a rolling boil. That together we can do a lot.
And we've been talking to the MPO in Yakima Valley in Washington. And they really want to build an intermodal station that would be buses, it would be trains, it would be all of the above. And that would be the hub of basically a new, not exactly a downtown, but a new business district that doesn't exist now. And our friends at the Yakima Valley Conference of Governments are very excited about that.
And we just heard yesterday from our friends over in Ogden too. They have a gorgeous station, but really looking at downtown, since that's the beauty with passenger rail. You're able to get downtown center to downtown center, and having a gorgeous station like you have here in Rock Springs is a beautiful entryway for people to come into the community and really showcase what's the best about communities. They're able to go where you need to go and have a pleasant entryway. And if people are even passing through on the train, they might look out the windows like, hey, that looks like a neat, vibrant town. I should stop by it sometime. And just sort of those little nuances.
And those local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Oregon City's another one where they have built basically a set of businesses right there at the train station, and that's been very successful. I happen to know the former mayor of Leavenworth, Washington. If you've been to Leavenworth, they've redone the whole town as this Bavarian theme thing that they do, and they had the train going through, but it didn't stop there. And so the guy who was the mayor at the time convinced Amtrak that they really needed to do a stop there, which meant that he said, we will put up the platform, and we will put up the station. And in fact, they were so impressed with him that they hired him. But that's those are the sorts of things that can be done.
Exactly, and even Moline, Illinois, which is it's in the Quad Cities there across from Davenport, Iowa, that they have a new station facility constructed there and a hotel right by there waiting for a passenger train that's been planned for years now, but kind of been stuck in limbo. I wouldn't be surprised with the opportunities before us today that's going to be moving forward, but they know what that can bring to their community and really welcoming people to town and having a place to hop off at that they're able to kind of offload their bags and be able to just walk around downtown. And that can be replicated so many times throughout the greater Northwest region and beyond.
Ellensburg, Washington's another one. That is privately, I think it's actually owned by the city, but it's been rented by a private individual who did an amazing renovation job on that station. And he's using it for events now. But, he's ready to have a train go through there when the train gets there. So we'll be there next week.
Again, thank you all for coming today or listening in online. Really appreciate your time. But yeah, if there's any other questions, comments, or especially the regional nuances there that we're able to help convey, especially to the FRA next week. Sometimes those anecdotes there are really powerful to really exhibit in colorful clarity to the FRA about the needs and opportunities out in our region, since they might not be able to see that by looking elsewhere. So thank you again, and please